And many of them are involved in professional certifications of various kinds. So our target audience was the engineering staff who are professional engineers primarily, but there are a smattering of other certifications that they have to maintain. I, for example, am a certified systems engineering professional. So the problem that was presented to us was that my office started getting inquiries of, you know, in the state of New Mexico, we have to have 4 hours of ethics training every 2 years to maintain our licenses. Where do we get it? So the institution offers 1 year each, 1 unit each year for all employees of kind of general business ethics. And what they were looking for was something that was more specific to the problems that they faced as engineers. And so we first looked to see if there were any providers. Well, there's hardly anybody giving on-site training, and even in online training, there were not things that were specific enough for incorporating things like the Los Alamos relevant rules, regulations, and so on regarding ethics. And so the initial solution was to develop a class in-house that would provide that LANL-specific kind of engineering ethics training. So we, you know, being good doobies, followed the systematic approach to training using the ADDIE model to develop that training, put together a presentation classroom-based course, which we then modified for online presentation. Well, I'll be in their way.
No, you won't be in the way of the projector.
In the projector. Got it. Got it. Got it. Thank you. Okay, so you know, we put together this course, which was all well and good, but then we realized that, you know, we had to do, they're going to have to do this every year. And so the nature of the material is pretty static. The New Mexico Administrative Code doesn't change from year to year, so we're going to have to teach the same thing over and over again. And this lecture-based presentation format is not particularly conducive to having for materials for adult learners when it's a repetition kind of a thing. So we were looking for a different pedagogical model that would be more suitable for the adult learners that we were dealing with. And what we became interested in was case models. And so I want to talk a little bit about why we thought that this case-based instruction would be responsive to the needs of adult learners. So what we did was kind of went into the literature about adult learners and tried to understand what the characteristics were and say, what are the characteristics of case models that would line up with the needs of the adult learner. So because, yeah.
That's a common approach also in mathematics. Sometimes the theory is very abstract, and an alternative approach is just to solve problems and teach the course ethics.
Correct, yeah. So because the cases focus on real problems rather than subject matter, and because they present information in context, they're responsive to the needs of adult learners to know not only the subject matter, but why, how, understand what's underlying it. The adult's orientation to learning is problem-centered and contextual, so the cases provide context. And then the basis of adults' motivation to learn is intrinsic value and personal payoff. And the literature fairly extensively supports the notion that being able to present information in context in a case provides greater intrinsic value than other forms of presentation.
Can I ask a quick question?
Uh-huh.
Since you guys were gonna have to do this year over year, did you think about perhaps creating an online framework and maybe swapping out the particular cases year after year?
Yes, and that's actually what we did.
Oh, okay.
And there's more, well, there's more about, actually, I'm not going to talk about that, so it's okay.
This question,
Yeah, so,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
so,
but are you, so, a follow-up of the question, are you going to have this online thing just alone? Yes?
well, no, we have something else.
Okay.
Everyone's jumping.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, it's not, it's okay, it's okay.
Because you talked about development of, the face-to-face training, that's what you.
Right, exactly, yeah, so the cases, right, the cases are also online. We are using actually a survey tool as the delivery platform, SurveyMonkey. And I'll show you just a static view of one of them here in a minute. We're augmenting them, to Najib's question, with an online discussion board. And I'll talk more about that in the afternoon because it's not working out so well for us at the moment. But
Maybe we can give you a
well, we have some limitations that are partially responsible for the problem, but that's whole nother conversation. So more on case models and andragogy. Case models put the burden of thinking on the learners, and the narrative presentation encourages learner engagement. And so this is consistent with the adult learner's tendency to not want to be dependent on an instructor and to be much more self-directed in their learning.
Can I just say one more thing? The adult, and I'll shut up, I won't say another word. With the adult learners,
She can't promise
I promise, I swear to God, with the adult learners, it's like they almost need a hook that they need, with their previous knowledge, they need a hook to hang it on, otherwise it's not gonna make sense for them.
Well, there you go.
Okay,
You just made that point.
okay.
So the case models let people draw analogies to their own experience, and that's responsive to this need to be able to hook onto their own experience, to be able to explore various roles that they may have played. And the case models facilitate that because they enable you at least to explore from various perspectives.
Heidi, I guess I'll ask my question. You ever ask them to look at what's missing in the scenario, what extra information would have been valuable, or what?
Not explicitly, but we do make them read between the lines a little bit to make inferences.
And sometimes you could make more than one, you could make different inferences, or you always have to make.
Well, you could. I mean, just because these ethics things are never black and white. And so that's what we were hoping to be able to do with the discussion board.
I can answer this up before. If this, then that.
Correct.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Yeah, right. So I'm sorry that this is not very easy to read, but this is.
All right, we've already said everything. No.
This is just one of the cases that we have as a snapshot, and I just want to make a couple points about it. The first point is that these are all real cases drawn from a variety of sources. The resource list is in the proceedings paper. So this is the case of the swinging bridge, which is a real case. We adapted them for online presentations, so we summarized them in short segments, no longer than 1 page long. And we doled out the segments in series so that we kind of walked people through the case in pieces. To satisfy our legal department, we removed the names of the people and the companies or locations that were involved. So here we've got Eddie Engineer. We also added in fictitious characters or circumstances that would allow us to explore things that weren't in the actual cases. So here we've got Sam, structural engineer, who's a laboratory employee. Well, SAM doesn't exist and the lab wasn't involved in the case. But it allowed us to look at questions about operating inside one's area of professional competency and then the final thing is that one thing that we were concerned about when we took our cases and put them online is that they would lose the richness of the dialogue that happens in classroom interactions. And not just interaction with the instructor, but interaction among the students as well. And so we thought that what we would do would be to put branching in so that in particular, in cases where the person gave an incorrect answer, they would be directed to either additional information that might help them to make a correct determination, or at least an explanation of why their response wasn't the best response that it could have been. So we started this project actually in 2009, and at that point, all we were interested in was, are we getting the people through? So we collected throughput data, and that was all we collected. Once we went to the online cases for refresher, we wanted to know, is it actually being refreshed, right? So is there retention from that initial training that carries over and they can apply that knowledge in these cases? So we started then looking at the correct response rate on these questions. We did not have the ability at the time in our learning management system to take qualitative feedback. So the only feedback that we had from the learners was stuff that we got informally. Now, that was kind of a happy situation in a way, because I got more thank you notes for providing this than I'd gotten for anything else in my whole career. But you know, that's not exactly a scientific sample. So beginning in 2012, we started taking an action research approach, and were able to say, you know, we're also interested in whether the case method really is adding value and impact and is effective for the adult learner. So we did, starting in 2012, start obtaining formal feedback on the course, including on the pedagogical model used. And we used a version of Thalheimer's survey, which is different from other smile sheets because it not only asks, you know, did you like this? You know, what did you think of the instructor? The kinds of things that are on normal smile sheets. But it also ties back to the learning concept. So in this case, we were asking about the learning objectives, the 4 learning objectives for the course. We also asked about the overall value of the learning experience, but then tried to get at the value and whether the thing would be having impact where we wanted it to have impact. So there are 2 questions about that. One is, are you going to use this on your job? And the other one is, are you going to share it with a coworker or a friend? And in addition, although it's not shown here, we did ask about whether they thought that case-based or presentation-based materials were more responsive to their needs as adult learners. And I'll show you what those questions were here in just a minute.
By the way, just a small point about getting, you know, unformatted comments. There's a lot of literature on text mining these days, and like SAS has a text miner, and people can just write essays of what they thought, and the machine will, in 2 minutes, will grab
Yeah.
a bunch of useful
Yeah.
information.
Earlier in my career, I did a lot of verbal protocol analysis, so I'm pretty familiar with that. The reason that I said that is not so much that it was random, but it was not systematic. And so, you know, in this method, you allow for open-ended comments, but you know that the whole learning population has had the opportunity to provide them. Things that are self-generated, you know, you don't necessarily know the person's motivations. So that's that was the only point I was trying to make there. So our results for 2012, you see the throughput and correct response rate there. We had 59 people take the course, and of those, 29 responded to the course evaluation. And here were the learning objectives, and most people said that those were, that the specific information presented relative to those learning objectives was a nice reminder.
Did you have any higher expectations than that they would say it was a nice reminder, you personally?
No.
Okay.
And I'll jump to the discussion on that topic. And basically this was a refresher. So we would have been surprised if we had a lot of people saying, this is the first time I've ever heard that, right? You hope that's not the result you get. As far as the likely impact, 65% said they were at least 70% likely to use the information. Only 10% said 30% likely or less. Likelihood of sharing with a coworker or friend, a little bit lower, but still pretty healthy numbers saying that they would share it with a coworker or friend, and not very many saying that they would not likely do that. So here's the results as far as the andragogy design principles. Basically, there were only 2 of these where they said that the case method was better, and that was this tendency toward autonomy and self-directedness and learning as problem-centered and contextual. Everything else was said to be equally supported by cases or presentation.
The first column is always dominates the third.
Well, and that was the next point I was going to make. There was no case where the presentation method was seen to be better than the case method. The comments were pretty consistently positive. I'll just read 1 or 2. The case method puts a real-world perspective on the lessons, and especially when consequences of failure to behave ethically are demonstrated, it makes the lesson have meaning. For this subject matter, case studies seem to be more meaningful. And the only negative comments that we got had to do with the fact that there's often not a right or wrong answer in these ethics cases. So here's one of those. I like this one. Ethics can be black or white, but sometimes it is gray or striped or polka dotted. These gray areas are the hardest thing for engineers to come up with the right answer. And this was consistent with the comments that we had gotten previously in the unsolicited set.
So the answer, the comment was the hard problems are hard?
Yeah, exactly, basically. So the discussion of the results, the throughput was similar to the past years. The correct response rate was significantly lower than in the past. And we were initially very concerned by this because we took it as an indication that we were not having retention or we weren't refreshing what we wanted to refresh. But when we started looking into it, we realized that there were a couple of questions, 2 questions, that were driving the result. And when we pulled them out, we found that the correct response rate was not significantly different than we had had in previous years. We looked at those questions and found that we think the problem was with the construction of the questions. So there was one where it was a multiple choice question, but the STEM asked for the best response. And so the most common thing was that the more obvious of the possibly correct responses was the one that was chosen, and people didn't read through and grok to the fact that they could have multiple answers there. So then the second one had to do with a situation where we were asking about a case that had been generated through the National Society of Professional Engineers. And it had to do with a vendor taking a client to a swanky golf club. And the NSPE has dealt with numerous cases like this. And their conclusion has always been, as long as there's no quid pro quo and it's kind of an industry norm, to do this, it's okay. The STEM clearly said where it came from, but this is a case where LANL's code of conduct is more rigid than what the NSPE would say. And so we are not allowed to take a gift having a value of more than $20 in one instance and more than $50 over the course of a year. Well, clearly this golf round was over that. And so what we think is that people were responding from the LANL frame of reference, not from the National Society's frame of reference. We do, in 2013, we did have questions that were structured to try to ferret out if we're right on this. But we're still analyzing that data, so I don't know the answer to that right today. The course evaluations, as I said, the most common rating being a nice reminder. That's consistent with this being a refresher. We were pleased with the results that we got on the likely impact of the training. The instructional design results, the case methods were viewed as being better meeting adults' needs in these two regards, but there was no clear winner on the others. And we were a little bit surprised by that because we thought that the case studies would be better at meeting learners' needs about incorporating their experience base and having learners play different roles, because we had explicitly built the different roles into the cases. So that was a little surprising to us.
On the other hand, they may simply be so unfamiliar with that, it doesn't occur to them they're doing it.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. So this is the conclusion slide. Our selection of the case model was driven by the needs of adult learners, not by the particular subject matter to be trained. And so we think that the case model would be effective in other disciplines where, for instance, healthcare, public accountancy, law, where the adult learners are motivated by the need to maintain a professional certification, something that has some value to them. And then also I said that in 2012 we were using an action research frame of reference to generate the problem statement, and it was that was key to allowing us to generate the additional knowledge about the case method. So I'll stop there. I do have a resource list. Here, it's also in the proceedings paper, so you don't need to be jotting down a million URLs. Thank you.